I was wrong about so many things in my life, but nothing prepared me for the silence that followed that summer afternoon at the Whitcomb estate. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat thundering in your ears, where 43 pairs of eyes turn toward you and you suddenly understand that everything you thought you knew about your own family had been a carefully constructed lie. My name is Edmund Hartley. I'm 67 years old, and I've spent the last 4 decades building something I never spoke much about, even to my own son. I live in a modest weatherboard cottage on the outskirts of Tauranga. Drive a 15-year-old ute that still runs as well as the day I bought it. And most mornings you'll find me at the local bakery getting a flat white and a custard square, chatting with whoever happens to wander in. To anyone passing through, I look like just another retired bloke enjoying the slow pace of the Bay of Plenty. That's exactly how I wanted it. My wife Margaret passed away 9 years ago this October. Cancer. The slow kind that gives you time to say everything but leaves you with the cruel knowledge that words are never enough. We had 1 child together, our boy Thomas, who's now 34 and works as an architect in Auckland. He inherited his mother's gentle eyes and her habit of seeing the best in people, sometimes to his own detriment. 3 years ago, Thomas met a woman named Vanessa Whitcomb at a charity gala in Parnell. She was beautiful in that polished, deliberate way that comes from generations of money and the kind of finishing that costs more than most Kiwi families earn in a year. Her father, Reginald Whitcomb, had built one of the largest construction conglomerates in the country, with offices in Auckland, Wellington, and Sydney. Her mother, Cordelia, came from old British stock that had emigrated to New Zealand after the war, and had never quite let go of the idea that they were better than the people around them. When Thomas first brought Vanessa home to meet me, I noticed the way her eyes swept across my small kitchen, my second-hand dining table, the framed photo of Margaret on the mantelpiece. I noticed how her smile tightened when I served her a cup of tea in a chipped mug because the good china had been packed away after Margaret died and I'd never bothered to bring it back out. I noticed everything, but I said nothing. A father learns when to speak and when to hold his tongue. I'd watched Thomas's face that day. The way he looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he'd been carrying his whole life. And I knew that whatever I said wouldn't matter. So I shook her hand, asked her about her work in marketing, and let my son have his happiness. They were married 18 months later in a ceremony I wasn't invited to. I'm not exaggerating. Thomas told me, 3 weeks before the wedding, that Vanessa's family was hosting a small, intimate gathering at their estate in Coatesville, and that, given the limited guest list and the formality of the event, perhaps it would be best if I attended a separate celebration they were planning for close friends and family on Tom's side later in the year. He stumbled over the words. He couldn't look at me when he said them. I told him I understood. I told him his mother would have been proud of him no matter what. I told him to enjoy his day. That separate celebration never happened. For 2 years after the wedding, I saw my son perhaps 4 times. Each visit was brief, awkward, and conducted at my cottage. Never at the home he now shared with Vanessa in Remuera. He would arrive alone, drink 1 cup of tea, ask after my health, and leave within the hour. I never asked why Vanessa didn't come. I never asked why I'd never been invited to their house. I just watched my boy slipping further away from me and told myself this was the cost of letting him build his own life. Then, last March, Thomas called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice had that careful, rehearsed quality I'd come to recognize, the sound of a man delivering a message he'd been instructed to convey. Dad, the Whitcombs are hosting a 30th wedding anniversary for Reginald and Cordelia in May. It's going to be at the Coatesville estate. Vanessa's parents have asked that I attend with the wider family, and they've extended an invitation to you. I waited. Dad? That's lovely, son. Of course I'll come. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, gathering himself. Dad, listen. The Whitcombs. Their world is very different from ours. There will be people there from all over, business associates, politicians, that sort of crowd. Vanessa's mother is particular about presentation. I want you to be comfortable. What he meant was, don't embarrass me. I told him I'd wear my good suit, the navy one Margaret had picked out for me 20 years ago for Thomas's university graduation. I told him I'd bring a nice bottle of wine. I told him I was looking forward to meeting Vanessa's family properly, since I'd only ever exchanged brief pleasantries with them at the registry office on the wedding day, where I'd been allowed to attend the legal signing but not the reception. He thanked me. He told me he loved me. Then he hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that call, looking out at the cowhigh tree Margaret had planted 30 years earlier. The yellow flowers were just beginning to fade for the season. I thought about my wife, about how she would have known exactly what to say, about how she would have laughed at the absurdity of needing a special suit to meet people who shared a grandchild with us. We talked about grandchildren once, Margaret and I. Back when Thomas was still in primary school, she'd said she hoped we'd live long enough to spoil them rotten. Vanessa and Thomas had been married for 2.5 years. There were no children. From the few comments Thomas had let slip, I gathered that Vanessa was not ready, and that her career came first. A week before the anniversary, I drove up to Auckland to have my suit altered. The tailor, an old Croatian man named Branko, who'd been making suits since before I was born, looked at me over his half-moon spectacles and asked why I needed it taken in. I've lost a bit of weight, I said. You've lost more than a bit, Edmund. You eating properly? I eat fine, he grunted, marking the chalk along my shoulders. My wife passed 11 years ago. First 2 years, I lived on toast and whiskey. Then my daughter sat me down and told me if I didn't start cooking proper meals, she was moving in. Scariest threat of my life. I laughed. It surprised me how much I needed the laugh. Where are you wearing this fancy suit? Family event. My son's in-laws. Anniversary party. He paused his marking and looked at me properly. The Whitcombs. I blinked. How did you... Edmund, I've been making your suits for 20 years. I made the one you wore to your wife's funeral. I know who your son married. I read the papers. The Whitcombs are not. They are people who measure others by the size of their estate and the brand of their watch. Be careful. I didn't ask him what he meant. I think I already knew. The morning of the anniversary, I drove the 3 hours from Tauranga up to Coatesville. The drive was beautiful. The autumn light catching the hills. The harbor glinting as I passed through Auckland and out the other side. The Whitcomb estate sat on 12 hectares of manicured land, with a long gravel driveway lined with established oaks that must have been planted a century before. The house itself was a sprawling colonial mansion, 3 stories of white-painted weatherboard, with broad verandas and immaculate gardens spilling toward a tennis court and a pool that looked like something from a glossy magazine. I parked my ute between a Bentley and a Range Rover. A young man in a black uniform approached me with a clipboard, asked my name, and looked momentarily confused when he found it on his list. He directed me toward the rear gardens, where the celebration was being held. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and walked around the side of the house. The first person I saw was Vanessa. She was standing near a champagne fountain, holding a flute and laughing at something a tall man in a charcoal suit was saying. She wore a deep emerald dress, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon, and when she saw me approaching, the laugh died on her lips. For a moment, she just stared. Then she composed herself, set down her glass, and walked toward me with the brittle smile of someone performing a duty they'd hoped to avoid. Edmund, you came. Of course I came. It's a lovely day for it. She glanced down at my suit, at my shoes, at the bottle of wine I'd brought tucked under my arm. The wine was a decent New Zealand Pinot from a Central Otago vineyard I'd come to know well over the years. Nothing flashy, nothing showy, Just a good bottle. You didn't have to bring anything. Wouldn't have felt right turning up empty-handed. She took the bottle from me and handed it, without looking, to a passing waiter. Thomas is by the marquee. I'll let you find him. I should. Circulate. She walked away before I could respond. I made my way through the crowd. There must have been 150 people there, all of them dressed in clothes that whispered rather than shouted, the kind of understated elegance that costs a fortune precisely because it doesn't look like it costs anything. I felt the eyes on me as I passed, the subtle assessments, the polite nods that didn't quite reach the eyes. Thomas spotted me before I spotted him. He was standing near a marquee at the far end of the lawn, talking to two older men. When he saw me, his face did something complicated. A flicker of relief, followed by anxiety, followed by a careful neutrality. He excused himself from the conversation and met me halfway. "Dad, you made it." Said I would. He hugged me. Properly this time, for longer than he'd hugged me in years. When he pulled back, his eyes were a little wet. "Come on, I'll introduce you to a few people." For the next hour, I was ushered through a polite procession of introductions. Cousins, aunts, business partners, family friends. I shook hands. I smiled. I said the right things about the lovely weather and the beautiful gardens and how kind it was of the Whitcombs to host such a wonderful occasion. I noted the way conversation tended to die when I joined a group. The way people excused themselves a little too quickly. The way Vanessa's mother, Cordelia, when finally introduced to me, offered 3 fingers to shake and a smile that didn't move past her teeth. Then, just before the speeches were due to begin, Vanessa took the stage that had been set up near the marquee. She tapped a glass with a small silver spoon. The crowd hushed. A camera operator hired for the occasion swung his lens toward her. "Thank you all so much for coming today to celebrate Mom and Dad's 30 wonderful years together," she began. Her voice was honeyed, practiced. "Before Daddy gives his speech, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce some of the newer faces in our family circle, since so many of you have been asking." She turned and gestured toward Thomas. "Most of you know my husband Thomas, who I'm so lucky to have married. He's the wonderful architect designing the Whitcomb Tower extension we'll be breaking ground on next year." Polite applause. Thomas smiled, raised a hand. He looked uncomfortable, and Vanessa continued, her eyes finding me in the crowd. "I'd also like to introduce Thomas's father, Edmund. Edmund came all the way up from Tauranga today, which was very sweet of him." She paused. The smile widened. "Edmund's a bit of an inspiration to all of us, really. He retired quite young and has spent the last few decades enjoying a wonderfully simple life. No commitments, no pressures, just a little cottage and his— What was it again, Edmund? Fishing? Gardening?" A few light laughs rippled through the crowd. "This is my slacker father-in-law, everyone. Living proof that you don't need ambition to be content." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was worse than loud. It was that polite, knowing chuckle that travels through a wealthy crowd when one of their own makes a joke at the expense of an outsider. Cordelia, near the front, actually laughed properly, her hand pressed to her chest. I watched Thomas's face. He was staring at Vanessa, his mouth slightly open, his cheeks flushed crimson. He looked like a man who had just been struck. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't react. 40 years in business teaches you many things. But the most important is this: the man who reacts first has already lost. So I stood there, my hands clasped lightly in front of me, and I waited for her to finish. Vanessa, perhaps emboldened by the laughter, kept going. "Now, of course, we love Edmund. We do. Thomas adores his dad. And really, isn't there something rather charming about the simple life? Not all of us are cut out for the demands of the modern world. Some of us are just born to potter, More laughter. A man near me, someone I'd been introduced to as a cousin of Vanessa's named Hugo, leaned toward his wife and said, loud enough for me to hear, "Bless him," came in his Sunday best, probably his only suit. His wife giggled. Thomas was now visibly trying to catch Vanessa's eye, to signal her to stop. She was either ignoring him or genuinely couldn't see him through the lights. She raised her glass. So, to Edmund, the patron saint of taking it easy. "We're so glad you could join us today." She tipped her glass toward me. The crowd, mostly amused now, raised theirs in a mock toast. I raised my glass back. I gave her a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Vanessa. That's very kind of you." She blinked, momentarily thrown by my calm response, then turned back to the crowd to continue her speech. I let her finish. I let Reginald give his anniversary toast. I let the band start playing soft jazz. I let dinner be served on the long tables under the marquee. And then, around 6 in the evening, I stepped away from the crowd and walked down to the rose garden at the eastern edge of the property. I needed air. I needed to think. I was standing there, looking at a bed of late-blooming roses, when a voice spoke from behind me. "Edmund Hartley." I turned. The man approaching me was perhaps 55, well-dressed, with the careful bearing of someone used to negotiating large sums of money. I didn't recognize him. "Yes, my name is Charles Pemberton. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Whitcomb Holdings. I wonder if I might have a word with you in private." I looked at him carefully. There was something in his manner, a kind of barely concealed urgency, that told me this wasn't a casual approach. "All right." He led me further down the garden, away from the party, until we were standing near a small stone fountain. "Mr. Hartley, I'll be direct with you, because we don't have much time. I work for Reginald Whitcomb, but I've been with the company for 22 years, and I have a very clear understanding of where things stand. The Whitcomb construction business is in serious trouble. We've had a string of failed tenders, a major project in Sydney that went catastrophically over budget, and significant exposure to a property development that has just collapsed. We're looking at insolvency within 6 to 9 months unless something changes." I said nothing. "Reginald doesn't know I'm telling you this. Vanessa certainly doesn't. But I've been quietly looking for a buyer or a strategic partner, someone with the resources and the discretion to take a controlling interest and stabilize the business. I came here today hoping to corner one of 2 people I had on a short list. And then I saw you." "Saw me," I said. "Mr. Hartley." He looked at me directly. "I worked for the firm of Henderson and Yates as a junior accountant in 1998. I was on the audit team that valued Hartley Maritime when you took it private after the IPO buyback. I know exactly who you are. I know what you built. I know what it's worth. I have known for 28 years. I looked at him for a long moment. "And you've never said anything?" "It wasn't my place. Your privacy is your business. But I confess, when I saw you walk in here today, and when I heard what was said about you on that stage," his jaw tightened. "Mr. Hartley, I am asking you, formally, if you would consider acquiring Whitcomb Holdings. I believe you have the means. I believe you have the operational expertise to turn it around. And I believe that the family who owns it is currently being run by a generation that does not understand what it has." I stood very still. The roses behind me smelled sweet in the autumn air. "Charles, why would I do that?" "Because the alternative is a forced administration that will see 240 employees lose their jobs and a 60-year-old company stripped for parts by foreign buyers. Because you have the resources to save it. And because, with respect, you have just been publicly humiliated by the people who would currently lose nothing but their pride if I took this offer to anyone else." I thought about Margaret. I thought about Thomas, standing red-faced as his wife mocked his father in front of 150 people. I thought about the boy I'd raised, who deserved a marriage built on something better than performance and contempt. Charles, I need you to do something for me. I need you to give me the full financial position by tomorrow morning. Every contract, every liability, every staff record. If what you're saying is accurate, I'll have my people contact you on Monday. Your people, he said. My people. He nodded slowly. A small, professional smile crossed his face. I'll have the documents to you by 8 tomorrow morning. Where shall I send them? I gave him an address. Not my cottage. The address of an office in Auckland that he'd recognize, on the harbor, that had my company's name on the door in small brass letters that almost no one ever noticed. His eyes widened slightly when I said it. That's... Yes. Of course. I'll have them there by 8. We shook hands. He walked back toward the party. I stayed in the rose garden a while longer, watching the last of the autumn sun disappear behind the western hills. 40 years. 40 years of building Hartley Maritime from a single fishing trawler I'd bought with the inheritance from my father, into a fleet of cargo vessels, into a logistics company with port operations in 3 countries, into a privately held holding group that owned, among other things, several construction supply chains, a marine engineering firm, and as of 3 years ago, the ground lease on the Auckland waterfront site where Whitcomb Holdings had its corporate headquarters. I had never told Thomas. Not because I was hiding it from him, but because Margaret and I had agreed, when he was small, that we would raise our boy without the weight of expectations that came from money. He knew I owned a company that did shipping and logistics. He knew I was comfortable. He didn't know that the company had been valued, in the most recent independent assessment, at just over $420 million. And Vanessa, who had married my son, had never once asked. Over the next 10 days, my legal and financial teams went through Whitcomb Holdings with the kind of thoroughness that comes from doing this many times before. Charles Pemberton's assessment was accurate. The company was weeks, not months, from collapse. There were good bones underneath, a strong workforce, several profitable divisions, real estate assets that had been undervalued on the books. But the senior leadership had made a series of catastrophic decisions, and Reginald Whitcomb in particular had spent the last 3 years drawing dividends he shouldn't have been drawing while the foundations crumbled beneath him. On the 11th day, my company made a formal acquisition offer. It was a fair offer, generous given the circumstances, structured in a way that would protect the workforce and stabilize the business. It also meant that the Whitcomb family would lose all operational control, retain only a minority equity stake, and would no longer have the right to draw executive salaries or use company assets. Reginald Whitcomb rejected it within 24 hours. 2 weeks later, he came back, ashen-faced, and accepted. He didn't know who he was accepting from. The acquisition had been made through one of my holding subsidiaries, a name that meant nothing to him. The signing was scheduled for a Friday morning at the Whitcomb Holdings boardroom in Auckland. I had my CEO handle the early stages of the negotiation, but I told him I wanted to be in the room for the final signing. I needed to see it for myself. 2 days before that meeting, Vanessa hosted a Sunday lunch at her parents' Coatesville estate. Thomas called me on the Saturday and asked, hesitantly, if I would come. Vanessa thinks. She thinks she might have been a bit unkind at the anniversary party. She'd like to have you over for a family lunch. Just the 4 of us. Mom and Dad Whitcomb. Her and me. And you. Did she say that, Thomas? Or did you? A long pause. Both of us. Dad, please. I should have said something at the anniversary. I've been trying to find the right moment. I want to make it right. I'll come, son. I'll be there. I drove up that Sunday morning. The estate looked smaller than it had at the anniversary party. Perhaps because there were no guests, no marquee, no champagne fountain, Just the four of them on the rear veranda, with a long table set for five. Vanessa met me at the door. Her smile was strained but determined. "Edmund, thank you for coming. Wouldn't have missed it." Reginald shook my hand more firmly than he had at the anniversary. Cordelia offered me a cheek to kiss. Thomas hugged me again, the same long hug as before. We sat down to lunch. The conversation was careful, polite, navigating around the topic of the anniversary like it was a piece of broken glass on the floor. Halfway through the main course, Vanessa cleared her throat. "Edmund, I owe you an apology. What I said at the party was thoughtless and unkind, and I've thought a lot about it since. I didn't mean to suggest that there's anything wrong with the life you've chosen. Thomas has told me a great deal about you these last few weeks. About your wife. About how you raised him. I've been very lucky to marry into your family, and I haven't shown that nearly enough." I set down my fork. "Thank you, Vanessa. That means a great deal to hear." I let the silence sit for a moment. "Reginald, I understand the company is going through a difficult patch. Thomas mentioned something about a sale." Reginald's face tightened. He glanced at his wife, then at his daughter. "It's a temporary restructuring, Edmund. Just a strategic partnership with another firm to weather a difficult market. Nothing for you to worry about." "Has the deal closed?" "Friday." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. Thomas was concerned about you. I told him I'd ask after the family." Cordelia laughed lightly. "Edmund, you're very kind, but really, the Whitcomb Holdings situation is far above the pay grade of casual conversation. Let's enjoy our lunch." I smiled at her. "Of course. My apologies." The rest of the lunch passed pleasantly enough. As I was leaving, Thomas walked me to my ute. "Dad, I really am sorry. About the anniversary. About all of it. Thomas, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Whatever happens this week, I want you to know that I love you. I have always loved you. And I want you to know that I am proud of the man you've become, even when I worried about the choices you were making." He looked at me, confused. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Just remember what I said. And remember, your mother loved you more than anything in this world. She would tell you, if she were here, that the measure of a person is not who they are in their best moments, but who they are when they think no one important is watching." I drove home to Tauranga that evening. I slept badly. On Friday morning, I put on my Navy suit again, the one Branko had altered, and I drove back up to Auckland. The Whitcomb Holdings boardroom occupied the top floor of a tower in the central city. The view stretched across the harbor to the islands beyond. When I walked in at 10 in the morning, the room was already full. Reginald was at the head of the table, flanked by his lawyers. Cordelia had come along, which surprised me. So had Vanessa. Thomas was there too, looking tired and tense. Charles Pemberton sat off to one side, his face carefully neutral. When I walked through the door, every head turned. Reginald's expression went through 3 stages in about 4 seconds. Confusion, recognition, and a kind of slowly dawning horror. "Edmund, what? What are you doing here?" I walked the length of the boardroom and took the empty seat at the opposite head of the table. My CEO, who had been waiting in the corner, slid a black leather portfolio across to me. Vanessa stood up. "Edmund, this is a private business meeting. I don't know what Thomas told you, but you can't just—" "Vanessa," I said gently, "please sit down." There must have been something in my voice, because she did. I opened the portfolio. I looked at Reginald. "Reginald, my name is Edmund Hartley. I am the chairman and majority owner of Hartley Holdings, which through its subsidiary Pacifica Investments has just completed the acquisition of 100% of the operating interest in Whitcomb Holdings, including all subsidiaries, contracts, real estate, and intellectual property. The signing today is a formality. The transfer was effective at midnight. The silence in the room was absolute. Cordelia made a small sound, like a teacup being set down too hard. Reginald's face had gone the color of old paper. That's not. That can't be. Pacifica is. They're a Singapore-based investment group. Pacifica is a wholly owned subsidiary of Hartley Holdings, registered in Auckland in 1989. I am the founder, sole shareholder, and chairman. I have been for 37 years. I turned to Vanessa, daughter-in-law. She was staring at me. Her face the color of old wax. Her mouth was open. She didn't speak. At your parents' anniversary 3 weeks ago, you stood on a stage in front of 150 people and told them I was a slacker. You said I had no ambition. You said I lived a simple life because I wasn't cut out for the demands of the modern world. I closed the portfolio. You had been married to my son for 2.5 years. In all that time, you never once asked me what I did for a living. You assumed. You looked at my cottage and my old ute and my chipped mug, and you decided you knew everything you needed to know. I looked at her father, Reginald. Your CFO came to me at the anniversary party. He told me your company was going to collapse within months. He asked me to save it. I said I would consider it. I considered it. I made you a fair offer. You turned it down. Then, when reality caught up with you, you accepted. The offer stands. The terms are unchanged. As of today, I own the building we are sitting in. I stood up. Here is what is going to happen now. Charles Pemberton will continue as CFO. The 240 employees of Whitcomb Holdings will keep their jobs. Their pension contributions, which I understand have been delayed for the past 4 months, will be paid in full by close of business today, with interest. The senior leadership team will be replaced over the next 60 days. Reginald, you will retain a non-executive board seat for 2 years, with no operational authority and a nominal stipend, in recognition of the family legacy. Cordelia, your charitable foundation funded by company profits will continue to operate at its current funding level for another 5 years, after which it will be reviewed. I looked at Vanessa. You will not have any role in this company. You never had a real role to begin with, but the title of brand director and the salary that came with it will end this afternoon. Then I looked at my son, Thomas. You are still the architect of record on the Whitcomb Tower extension. That contract will be honored. Your work has been excellent and will be judged on its merits, as it always has been. Whatever happens between you and your wife is your business. You are my son, and I love you, and that has nothing to do with this room. His eyes were wet. He nodded once. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Vanessa start to cry. I heard Cordelia begin to speak in that thin, wounded voice she'd probably never had to use before. I heard Reginald sag in his chair with the weight of a man whose entire identity had just collapsed. I didn't look back. In the lift on the way down, my CEO, a good man named Ravi, who'd been with me for 15 years, finally spoke. That was a long time coming, Edmund. Was it? I've worked for you for 15 years. I've never seen you take an acquisition personally. Until today. I thought about that. Ravi, I didn't take it personally. I would have made the same offer to that company on Monday morning, regardless of what was said at that party. The numbers worked. The opportunity was real. The employees deserved better leadership. All of that is true. But I will admit, walking into that boardroom today and looking her in the eye, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. I felt my wife standing next to me. Margaret never tolerated cruelty. She used to say the measure of a marriage is whether the family you bring into it is treated with the same respect as the one you came from. I think, today, I finally honored that. The lift doors opened. We walked out into the sunlight on Queen Street. Thomas came to see me a fortnight later. He drove down to Tauranga on a Saturday morning, alone. He brought a bottle of the same Central Otago Pinot I'd taken to the anniversary, which made me laugh. We sat on the back porch and watched the cowhigh tree shed its last yellow flowers. Vanessa moved out 3 days ago, he said quietly. She's filed for divorce. Her parents are blaming me. They're saying I knew. They're saying I plotted with you. Did you know? Dad. I had no idea. I knew you owned a shipping company. I thought it was a few boats and some warehouses. I never asked. Because you never made it seem important. You never made anything about money seem important. That was the point, son. He was quiet for a while. How did you decide? When to tell her? When to tell me? I didn't decide, Thomas. The decision made itself. If she had been kind, if she had treated you like a partner instead of a project, if she had ever once shown the slightest interest in who I was as a person rather than what I could provide, she would have known. So would you. I wasn't hiding. I was waiting to see who you'd married. He looked at his hands. I didn't see it, Dad. For 3 years, I told myself she was just nervous, just adjusting, just dealing with the pressure of her family. I made excuses for her. Even when she stopped you from coming to the wedding, I told myself it was easier for everyone if I just kept the peace. Thomas, you're 34. You're allowed to have made a mistake. The question now is what you do with what you've learned. We talked until the sun went down. Before he left, he hugged me for a long time on the front porch. Dad, I want to ask you something. Will you teach me? About the company? About all of it? Not because I want to take it over. I'm an architect. I love what I do, but I want to understand the man you really are. I want to know my father. Son, I would like that more than anything. He drove back to Auckland that night. He's been coming down most weekends since. He started seeing a counselor. He started cooking again, properly, the way Margaret taught him. Last month, he met a primary school teacher from Devonport at a friend's birthday. He told me about her with the kind of cautious hope I hadn't seen in him in years. Her name is Ruby. She drives a 15-year-old Toyota. And when Thomas mentioned his father lived in Tauranga, she asked when she could meet me. He brought her down 2 weekends ago. She drank tea from a chipped mug and didn't blink. She admired the cowhigh tree. When she left, she hugged me and told me Thomas talks about his dad more than any man she'd ever dated. I don't know if anything will come of it. That's not for me to decide. But for the first time in a long time, I felt Margaret in the kitchen with us, smiling. Whitcomb Holdings, now restructured under a new name, is profitable again. The 240 employees are still there. So is Charles Pemberton, who became a friend and who comes down to Tauranga twice a year to fish off the mount with me. Vanessa, I'm told, has remarried, an investment banker in Sydney. I wish her no ill. I hope she has learned what her parents never taught her, which is that the people you dismiss are often the ones who could have loved you if you'd let them. Reginald Whitcomb died last winter of a heart attack. I attended the funeral, sat at the back, paid my respects, and left without speaking. Thomas told me later that Cordelia had wept when she saw me come in, and that she had said, more than once during the wake, that Reginald had been ashamed at the end. Ashamed of how the family had treated me. Ashamed of who they had become. I don't know what to do with that. I hold it gently, the way Margaret would have wanted me to. If you've listened this far, friend, let me leave you with a few things I've learned in my 67 years on this earth. The first is that wealth, real wealth, has nothing to do with what you own. It has to do with what you do not need to prove. The man who has built something true does not need anyone to know about it. The woman who is loved does not need to announce it. The family that is strong does not need to perform. The second is that humility is not weakness. It is the deepest form of strength a person can possess. When you can stand in a room full of people laughing at you and not flinch, not because you do not feel it, but because you know who you are, you have something they will never have, no matter how much they spend. The third, and the one I hold closest, is this. Be careful how you speak to the quiet people in your life. The man at the bakery who orders the same flat white every morning, the woman in the second-hand cardigan at the school gate, the father-in-law in the navy suit at the back of the room. You do not know what they have built. You do not know what they have survived. You do not know what they could give you if you simply asked them, with kindness, who they were. Margaret used to tell our son when he was small, every dignity you give to a stranger comes back to you when you need it most. I didn't always understand what she meant. I think I do now. Take care of the people who love you. Notice the ones who don't make a fuss. And never, ever, let anyone teach you that gentleness and ambition cannot live in the same heart. I'm Edmund Hartley, and that's my story. Thank you for sitting with me a while.